ready to dive into Ishmael with us. It's a book that really makes you think, and we've got some excerpts ready to go.
Yeah, Ishmael by Daniel Quinn.
That's the one. And think of this deep dive as like a cheat sheet to get the main ideas of the book.
It really asks some big questions about how we humans relate to the world.
Totally. Get ready for some unique perspectives on civilization, captivity, and even the stories we tell ourselves.
And to guide us through all this, we've got a pretty unique character at the center of it all.
Oh, yeah.
Ishmael, a highly intelligent gorilla who has spent years just observing human culture and has some surprising insights to share, let me tell you.
I bet. You know that feeling, right? Like you want to make a real difference in the world. Well, the book starts with our narrator, and we never actually learn his name.
Interesting.
But he's searching for a teacher, someone to guide him in saving the world, as he puts it.
Wow, saving the world. That's a tall order.
I know, right? He was all caught up in the energy of the counterculture movement.
Yeah.
But eventually he kind of felt let down, realized that no one really had the secret knowledge he was looking for.
Yeah, that search for answers, it can be tough. Have you ever experienced anything similar, like searching for a way to make things better only to find the world doesn't really offer easy solutions?
All the time. It's like you hit a wall and you're like, wait, no one has the answers.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a shock.
Definitely universal experience, that search for meaning. And even though the narrator stops actively searching, he still carries a kind of scar from that disillusionment.
You think so?
That's where Ishmael steps in.
And Ishmael's story is so captivating just on its own.
Oh, absolutely.
He starts by sharing his memories of being captured in Africa, and his years living in a zoo.
Oh, gosh. Can you imagine the psychological impact of that, being taken from your natural environment like that?
It's heartbreaking.
Ishmael describes this deep sense of wrongness that captive animals feel. Even talks about a tiger pacing endlessly in its cage,
Oh, wow.
driven by this unanswerable question of why.
It's like the tiger knows something's not right, but can't quite articulate it.
Exactly.
This is all fascinating, but it makes me wonder, how does a gorilla actually analyze his captivity?
That's a good point.
I mean, is Ishmael, anthropomorphized? What do you think?
That's a great question.
It's kind of a blurry line.
It is. Quinn definitely gives Ishmael a high level of intelligence and self-awareness, though.
I think so, too.
Allows him to go beyond that primal why and really dissect his situation. He remembers his life in Africa, the family he was a part of, and he compares it to the isolated existence he experiences in captivity.
Right. It's like he can see the stark difference between freedom and confinement.
Precisely. And it makes you think about what captivity actually means.
Yeah, what does it really mean?
Is it just physical bars, or could it be something more like a limiting worldview?
Oh, I like that.
This is where Ishmael's owner, Walter Sokolow, comes into the picture.
Okay, so who is Sokolow?
Sokolow is a Jewish man who was deeply affected by World War II and the loss of his family in the Holocaust. He saw this parallel between his own grief and Ishmael's captivity.
That's a powerful connection.
It is. Both of them held captive in a way by powerful narratives.
Right, so it's not just being physically trapped,
No, it's more than that.
but being trapped by ideologies or stories that limit how we understand the world.
Exactly. And Sokolow, he recognized this, and he began to teach Ishmael about different ways of seeing the world, different ways of thinking.
That's incredible. So like a mentor-student relationship, but with a gorilla.
It's pretty unique, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And this leads to Ishmael's distinction between what he calls takers and leavers.
Right. Two very different ways of being in the world.
Okay, let's break this down. Takers, they represent modern industrialized cultures.
The ones who believe they have a right to take whatever they want from the planet.
And leavers.
They embody all the other cultures throughout history.
Yeah.
The ones who live in a more harmonious relationship with nature.
It's interesting because when I first heard about this concept, I thought, oh, so Ishmael is advocating a return to hunter-gatherer societies.
That's a common misunderstanding.
Right.
He's not saying that at all. What he's doing is challenging us to question the story of progress and dominance that drives our modern world.
I see. It's like questioning the assumptions beneath our actions.
Exactly. Can technology and nature truly coexist? That's a question worth pondering.
Absolutely. And within this whole context of takers and leavers, Ishmael introduces this idea of the taker's creation myth.
Oh, yeah. This is key.
It's basically the belief that the world was made for humans to conquer and rule over.
Like we're at the top of the pyramid.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because even if it's not explicitly stated,
Right.
this narrative is woven into so much of our language, our thinking, our actions.
It's like an unquestioned truth.
Totally. Even think about the language we use,
Mm.
our environment, our resources, our planet. It automatically positions us as the owners and masters of everything.
You hit the nail on the head, and this brings us to a really pivotal moment in the Taker's story,
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
the agricultural revolution.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a game changer.
Ishmael argues that it wasn't just about new farming techniques, it was a cultural shift.
A shift in how humans saw themselves in relation to the world around them.
You got it. And he highlights a kind of hidden cost to agriculture, this belief that we can actually control nature.
Instead of coexisting with it.
Exactly. We went from being participants in the ecosystem to believing we were in charge of it.
And that shift, that idea that we could manipulate nature for our own benefit, led to so much.
Endless expansion and competition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is a big part of why we're dealing with environmental devastation today.
A direct consequence.
And it all stems from this idea that the takers believe they are exempt from a fundamental law that governs the natural world.
A law that has kept things in balance for millennia.
That's the law of limited competition. This idea that no one species can become too dominant because it would throw everything off.
Exactly. It ensures balance, prevents the destruction of the ecosystem.
But the takers, with their belief in their own superiority, they ignore this law. And that's leading to the crisis we see unfolding around us.
This is a really complex concept with some huge implications.
It is. It's hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
It is. It makes you think about the bigger picture.
It is.
You know what I find mind-blowing is how Ishmael connects the Taker's story to some of our oldest myths.
Oh, really? Like which ones?
Like the biblical story of Adam and Eve.
Wow, okay.
He suggests that it might actually be a lever perspective on the origins of agriculture.
Hold on. So you're saying the story of Adam and Eve?
Could be a cautionary tale.
About agriculture itself?
Yeah. The idea that humans weren't meant to have the knowledge of good and evil.
Represented by the forbidden fruit.
Exactly. And by trying to become like gods, knowing and controlling everything, we set ourselves on a path of separation from the natural world.
It's like we thought we could do better than nature.
In a way, yeah.
That's a powerful interpretation. It makes you think, what if the story of Adam and Eve isn't just about a garden, but about the entire planet?
It's a big question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And Ishmael doesn't stop there. He takes us even deeper into biblical stories.
He does. He uses them to illustrate his points.
What about Cain and Abel?
Ah, that's a good one. He interprets it as a parable about the conflict between agriculturalists and pastoralists.
Two very different ways of life.
Exactly. And he even suggests that the mark of Cain might be a metaphor
For what?
for the physical characteristics of the takers.
Wow, okay. That is provocative. It makes you re-examine those ancient stories in a whole new light.
That's what Ishmael does. He makes you think differently.
He does. All of this leads to a stark contrast between the two stories playing out on the planet right now. You've got the taker story, driven by endless growth and the desire to control everything.
And then you have the leavers.
The leaver story, which is all about living in harmony with nature and accepting limits.
Two very different paths.
It really is.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what story are we living by?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
So we're left with this contrast, between the takers and the leavers and the stories they live by. It makes you wonder, what are the consequences of these different stories?
That's a great question. Like, it feels like we've been just hurtling along with the taker's narrative, but where has it actually led us?
Ishmael uses this really powerful analogy to illustrate this point. He compares civilization to a flight.
A civilizational flight.
Yeah, but imagine it's like society is hurtling through the air in this really poorly designed contraption.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Think about those early attempts at flight where people just kind of jumped off cliffs and hoped for the best.
Yeah, they had no idea what they were doing.
They had no understanding of aerodynamics or anything.
No knowledge of the laws that govern flight.
Exactly. And that's what Ishmael is getting at. We, as a culture, we've been doing the same thing with civilization.
We've been flying blind.
Without knowing the natural laws that govern sustainability and balance.
And the consequences are all around us, right?
Yeah.
Environmental destruction, social unrest, this feeling of unease.
It's like we're on a runaway train.
And we've lost control.
We've lost control. But here's the thing. Ishmael thinks there's a way to regain that control. It's about designing a better aircraft, so to speak.
I like that analogy.
And that starts with understanding those laws that we've been breaking.
The laws that govern the community of life.
The laws that have allowed life on this planet to thrive for billions of years.
I'm curious, how does Ishmael talk about how takers and leavers interact with their environment. Does that give us any clues about these laws?
Well, he says that the takers, they view the natural world as this chaotic dog-eat-dog battleground,
Mm.
a place of savage, relentless competition.
But do the people who actually live in that world experience it that way?
No, not at all. The leavers, the ones who haven't separated themselves from the natural community,
Hmm.
they understand that there's an underlying order to it all, a set of principles that maintain balance,
And that's what we've forgotten.
or chosen to ignore.
Which leads to the big question. What is that law? What is that principle that's allowed life to thrive for so long?
It's the law of limited competition.
Limited competition.
You can compete, you can fight for survival, but you can't wage total war.
Okay.
You can't wipe out your competitors, and you can't deny them access to what they need to survive.
So it's like you can defend your meal, but you can't hoard all the food.
That's a good way to put it.
You can protect your territory, but you can't just claim the whole world.
Exactly. And Ishmael's argument is that it's this very law, this law of limited competition, that has allowed for the incredible diversity of life on Earth. That intricate web of interdependency that makes the whole system so resilient.
But by exempting ourselves from that law, the tokers are unraveling that web.
Creating a monoculture, a planet dominated by just one species.
Did you mention you had a garden? What happened there?
Oh, yeah, this reminds me. I used to try to control everything in my garden, micromanage every little detail. But then I learned to let nature do its thing.
What do you mean?
Just step back and let the plants find their own balance. It was amazing to see how much healthier and more vibrant the garden became when I gave up that need for control.
So you're saying that diversity is strength.
It's what allows an ecosystem to adapt and survive. A monoculture is fragile, vulnerable.
It's like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And that's the core of what Ishmael's saying. By ignoring the law of limited competition, by waging war on the natural world, we're not just destroying the planet, we're destroying ourselves.
Because we're a part of that web of life. We depend on a healthy planet, just like everything else.
We're all connected.
It's not just about saving the whales or the rainforest. It's about saving ourselves.
Our fate is tied to the fate of the planet.
It makes you rethink the whole conversation. It's not just about environmentalism anymore.
It's bigger than that.
It's about survival.
Survival and finding a way to live that aligns with the laws of nature. The laws that have worked for billions of years.
But with all this talk about laws and rules, it makes me think about the leavers. Where do they fit into all of this?
Right.
What's their story? Do they offer any insights into how we can regain that balance?
Ishmael spends a lot of time exploring those differences between the two cultures, emphasizing the leaver's deep connection to the natural world.
He describes them as living in sync with nature, respecting the limits of their environment.
Yeah, they live in a way that ensures the long-term health and well-being of their community.
It's a stark contrast to the taker's pursuit of progress.
It is. But it's important to remember that the leavers aren't some perfect society. They have their own challenges.
Oh, for sure.
Their own conflicts.
So it's just a different story.
A different way of being in the world.
And that's what makes it so valuable to explore.
It gives us a new perspective, a new set of possibilities.
Expands our understanding of what it means to be human.
Exactly. It challenges our assumptions about what's possible, about what a good life looks like.
Right. It forces us to confront the consequences of our choices.
The choices that have led us to this point.
All of this makes me wonder. Is there really a way back? Can we as a culture truly change our story? Or are we just doomed?
That's a question that runs through Ishmael, and it's a question we're going to keep grappling with as we go deeper. There's no easy answer.
No quick fix.
But the fact that we're asking the question, that we're having this conversation,
That's got to count for something, right?
it's a sign of hope, a sign that we're starting to see the flaws in our current path.
And that maybe there's a different way.
Ishmael leaves us with that sense of possibility, however unlikely it might seem.
A challenge to reimagine how we relate to the world.
And to find a story that allows both us and the planet to thrive.
What does that even look like? How do we change the narrative, not just for ourselves, but for an entire culture that seems to be heading for disaster? So we're left with this challenge to reimagine our whole relationship with the world. Find a new story. But how can we even begin to change the narrative, not just for ourselves, but for an entire culture?
That's where Ishmael's focus on storytelling is so important. He's not just critiquing what we do, but the beliefs behind those actions.
It's like he's saying if we want to change our behavior, we got to change the story we're living by. And one of the most interesting parts of the book for me is how he interprets the agricultural revolution.
Oh, yeah. How so?
He argues that it wasn't just a shift to farming.
Right. It was more than that.
It was a revolution against something, a revolution against the lever way of life,
Interesting.
and specifically against what he sees as the taker's biggest fear.
Fear. What kind of fear?
The fear of living at the mercy of the world. The fear of not being in control. Ishmael argues that the takers couldn't handle the idea of living in a world where they couldn't dictate their own survival. A world where they couldn't guarantee a steady food supply and were subject to the whims of nature.
So they tried to create a system to exert control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dominate the environment, make themselves the masters of their own destiny.
But in doing that, they cut themselves off from the very thing that sustains them.
The natural.
Exactly.
It's like the ultimate irony, right?
Yeah, it is.
In trying to escape their fear, they created a system that's way more fragile, way more vulnerable.
They built it on this illusion of control, this belief that they could bend the laws of nature to their will.
And we see the consequences of that illusion every day.
Everywhere.
Which brings us back to the levers. Their way of life, as Ishmael describes it, is about acceptance. Living in harmony with the natural rhythms of the world. Not trying to conquer or control, but to participate, to find their place in the community of life.
It's a totally different way of being.
It really is. Challenges so much of what we take for granted in our modern world. Makes me wonder, is it even possible for us to embrace that way of being?
It's a tough question.
It is.
It would mean giving up this idea that we're in charge, relinquishing control and trusting in something larger than ourselves.
It's a big ask for a lot of people.
It is. It requires a fundamental shift in our thinking, a willingness to question those narratives that have shaped us for so long.
But could it happen? Could an entire culture actually shift its story like that?
Ishmael thinks it's possible. He points out that history is full of examples of cultural transformation, of stories being rewritten.
Okay. Yeah, I see that.
He even mentions the fall of communism as a recent example.
That's a good point. The fall of communism really shows how even the most entrenched narratives can change. It's a reminder that change is possible.
Even when it seems impossible.
So what does that mean for us, for our story?
It means we have a choice. We can keep clinging to the taker narrative, hurtling towards a future that doesn't look so good. Or we can choose to embrace a new story. One that acknowledges our connection to the natural world, one that honors that law of limited competition.
But that choice isn't just about individual actions, is it?
No.
It's about a collective shift in consciousness.
A cultural awakening.
How do we even begin to make that happen?
That's the challenge Ishmael leaves us with. The challenge to not only reimagine our own relationship with the world, but to become storytellers ourselves.
I like that.
To spread a message of hope, to inspire others to see things differently, to understand that we're not just passengers on this train.
We have the power to change course.
We can rewrite the ending.
We've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into Ishmael today.
We have.
We explored the idea of captivity, physical and mental, the contrasting stories of takers and leavers, and the consequences of thinking we have dominion over the planet.
Some big ideas.
We even wrestled with the question of whether we can change our story and find a better way to live.
And ultimately, I think the most important takeaway is that the story isn't over yet.
It's not.
It's up to each of us to decide what role we'll play in writing the next chapter.
And that's a responsibility we can't ignore. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and may the insights from Ishmael stay with you long after we're done. Who knows, maybe you'll even want to pick up the book yourself.
That would be great.
What story will you choose to live by?